Apathy and Depression Part 2. Welcome to this video, and if you've been joining me for this journey of letting go, we are now up to the second part of the Apathy and Depression video series, which is the first emotion that we're looking at in the scale of emotions. As we start to peel back the layers of emotions that have been suppressed maybe a whole lifetime in some cases, we're going to be getting lighter and happier and freer as we go. So at the end of this video, I'm actually going to share the first exercise, the first of many exercises that we'll be doing as we go through this series. So get ready for that. There's going to be some practical tools. Hope you're getting lots of value out of this, and I hope as you've been coming through this series with me that you've been getting some aha moments, you've been getting some realizations, and that you are starting to feel the transformative effects of this simple, straightforward process that everyone can do. So let's dive into it. Apathy and depression. In the last video, we looked at some of the major causes of apathy and depression. You know, this feeling like there's nothing we can do, there's no point, there's no hope, things will never change. Characterized by a low energy, feeling stuck, feeling hopeless. And we've all experienced this at different stages of our life. But, you know, for myself, just sharing a bit of my personal journey with this, I first started really experiencing depression in my teen years, but I found it was too overwhelming for me to handle. And what I ended up doing was I suppressed it. I suppressed the depression. And it was only actually in recent times that finally, because I'd come across this method, the letting go method, I was able to face my depression, and I was able to go to the depths of my depression. And in the depths of my depression and in feeling it and allowing myself to experience it, amazingly, I was able to let go of it completely, so that now depression isn't a problem for me. It's not something that I push out of sight, it's just not a problem. If feelings of sadness come up, I'm able to deal with them using this technique. So, as I was saying, in the last video we looked at the causes of apathy and depression. What is it that gets us into these states and keeps us stuck there? Well, first of all, we looked at the belief that I can't, and how that's really just I won't. In the majority of cases, if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, I can't, those I can't stories that keep us bound to not doing the things that we truly want to be doing with our lives in relationships, career, self-expression, fun, exercise, health, all these different domains. Most of the time, this is just an I won't. So that's what we looked at, and starting to peel back the layers of what are these stories we're telling ourselves, and what's the emotional payoff we're getting from telling ourselves I can't, and what's it costing us? What's it going to cost us if we keep living like that? Stay bound in this state of apathy, versus looking at, is this really an I won't thing? And if it is, what's behind that? Am I ready to face the emotions of, let's say, making a career change, or making a change in my health, or making a change in my relationships, or learning a new skill, learning a new hobby, trying something completely new, turning a new page in your life? What's that going to bring up for you, and are you ready to face that? And this is how we move out of depression. So in this video, we're going to cover blame, which is a huge, huge part of apathy and depression. We're going to look at past conflicts, which are, unhealed traumas from our past, which is also a major reason that we get stuck in apathy and depression. And also, lastly, the company we keep, the people that we spend time with. All of these factors, if we start to pull these apart and look at them individually in any area that we've got apathy or depression in our life, and we make a list of what are the payoffs in each of these areas of being attached to all these different things, and am I willing to let those go so that I can be free from this? So let's jump in. Apathy is the belief that I can't. Oh, we've already looked at that. Moving on to blame. Blame. One of the biggest blocks to overcome in getting out of depression and apathy is that of blame. Blame is a whole subject in itself. Looking into it is rewarding. To begin with, there are a lot of payoffs to blame. We get to be innocent, we get to enjoy self-pity, we get to be the martyr and the victim, and we get to be the recipients of sympathy. Perhaps the biggest payoff of blame is that we get to be the innocent victim and the other party is the bad one. We see this game played out in the media constantly, such as the endless blame games, dramatized in a multitude of controversies, mudslinging, character assassinations, and lawsuits. In addition to the emotional payoff, blame has considerable financial benefits. Therefore, it's a tempting package to be the innocent victim, as it's often financially rewarded. There was a famous example of this in New York City many years ago. A public conveyance accident occurred. People poured out of the front door of the vehicle, then gathered into a small crowd, furnishing their names and addresses for future financial benefit. Bystanders quickly caught onto the game and secretly climbed into the back of the vehicle so that they could emerge from the front as injured, innocent victims. They hadn't been in the accident, but they were going to collect a reward. Blame is the world's greatest excuse. It enables us to remain limited and small without feeling guilty. But there is a cost, the loss of our freedom. Also, the role of victim brings with it a self-perception of weakness, vulnerability, and helplessness, which are the major components of apathy and depression. The first step out of blame is to see that we are choosing to blame. Other people who've had similar circumstances have forgiven, forgotten, and handled the same situation in a totally different way. We earlier saw the case of Viktor Frankl, who chose to forgive the Nazi prison guards and to see a hidden gift in his experience at the concentration camps. Amazing, some of the experiences that people have been in, but they've still chosen not to blame. So, because others, such as Frankl, have chosen not to blame, this option is available to us as well. We have to be honest and realize that we're blaming because we choose to blame. This is true no matter how justified the circumstances seem to be. It's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of taking responsibility for our own consciousness. We want to get out of this whole paradigm of right and wrong, this duality of right and wrong, which keeps us bound to these negative emotions. So it's a totally different situation to see that we choose to blame rather than thinking that we have to blame. In this circumstance, the mind often thinks, well, if the other person or event isn't to blame, then I must be. Blaming others or ourselves is simply not necessary or helpful. The attraction of blame arises in early childhood as a daily occurrence in the classroom, playground, and at home amongst our siblings. Blame is a central issue in the endless court proceedings and lawsuits that characterize our society. In truth, blame is just another one of the negative programs that we've allowed our mind to buy because we never stop to question it. Why must something always be someone's fault? Why must the whole concept of wrong be introduced to the situation in the first place? Why must one of us be wrong, bad, or at fault? What seemed like a good idea at the time may not have turned out to be. That's all. Unfortunate events may have just happened. To overcome blame, it's necessary to look at the secret satisfaction and enjoyment we get out of self-pity, resentment, anger, and self-excuses, and to begin to surrender all of these little payoffs. The purpose of this step is to move up from being a victim of our feelings to choosing to have them. If we merely acknowledge and observe them and begin to disassemble them and surrender the component parts, then we are consciously exercising our choice, our sovereignty. In this way, we make a major move out of the morass of hopelessness and helplessness. It's helpful in overcoming resistance and taking responsibility for our negative programs and feelings to see that they all come from the small aspect of ourselves. It is the very nature of the smallest part of ourselves to think negatively. So there's an unconscious tendency to readily agree to our small self's limited viewpoint. But that's not the whole of our beingness. For outside and beyond the smaller self is our greater self. We may not be conscious of our inner greatness. We may not be experiencing it, but it is there. If we let go of our resistance to it, we can begin to experience it. Depression and apathy, therefore, result from the willingness to hang on to the small self and its belief systems, plus the resistance to our higher self, which consists of all the opposites of the negative feelings. Small self, limited, negative, painful, bigger self, greater self, unlimited potential. It is the true nature of the universe that everything in it is represented by its equal and opposite. Thus, the electron's equal and opposite is the positron. Every force has an equal and opposite counterforce. Yin is compensated for by yang. There is fear, but there is also courage. There is hatred, but its opposite is love. There is timidity, but there's also bravery. There is stinginess, but also generosity. In the human psyche, every feeling has its opposite. The way out of negativity is, therefore, the willingness to acknowledge and let go of negative feelings, and at the same time, the willingness to let go of resisting their positive opposite. Depression and apathy are the result of being at the effect of the negative polarity. So, how does this work in everyday life? Let's look again at the example of someone's birthday coming up. Because of things that have happened in the past, we have resentments and we feel unwilling to do anything for the birthday. Somehow it just seems impossible to get out and shop for a birthday present. We resent having to spend the money. The mind conjures up all kinds of justifications. I don't have time to shop. I can't forget how mean she was. She should apologize to me first. In this case, two things are operating: clinging to the negative and the smallness in ourselves, and resisting the positive and the greatness in ourselves. The way out of apathy is to see, first of all, that I can't is actually an I won't. In looking at the I won't, we see that it's there because of negative feelings, and as they come up, they can be acknowledged and let go. It's also apparent that we're resisting positive feelings. These feelings of love, generosity, and forgiveness can be looked at one by one. We can sit down and imagine the quality of generosity and let go of resisting it. Is there something generous within ourselves? In this case, we may not be willing to apply it to the birthday person in the beginning. What we can begin to see is the experience of such a quality as generosity within our consciousness. It's always there. We begin to see that as we let go resisting the feeling of generosity, there is generosity. It starts to well up within us. We do, in fact, enjoy giving to others under certain circumstances. We begin to remember the positive flood of feeling that comes upon us when we express gratitude and acknowledge the gifts that others have given us. We see that we've really been suppressing a desire to forgive, and as we let go of resistance to being forgiving, there emerges the willingness to let go of the grievance. As we do this, we stop identifying with our small self and become consciously aware that there is something within us that is greater. It's always there, but hidden from view. So this same process is applicable in all negative situations. It enables us to change the context by which we perceive our current situation. It enables us to give it a new and different meaning. It lifts us up from being the helpless victim to the conscious chooser. It doesn't mean that we have to rush out and buy a birthday gift, but it does mean that we're now aware that we are in our current position out of choice. We have total freedom with greater latitude of actions and choices. This is a much higher state of consciousness than the helpless victim who is trapped by past resentment. One of the laws of consciousness is that we are only subject to a negative thought or feeling or belief if we consciously say that it applies to us. We're free to choose not to buy into a negative belief system. So how does this work in everyday life? Let's take a common example. The news says that unemployment is at a record high. The TV news commentator states that no jobs are available. At this point, we're free to refuse to buy into the negative thought form. We can say instead, unemployment does not apply to me. By refusing to accept the negative belief system, it has now got no hold over our life. Examples from personal experience reveal that during periods of high unemployment, such as after World War II, so this is David Hawkins, the author, there was no problem getting a job. As a matter of fact, one could have 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. Dishwasher, waiter, bellhop, cab driver, bartender, factory worker, greenhouse worker, and window washer. This was the consequence of a belief system that said, unemployment does not apply to me. And where there's a will, there's a way. There was also a willingness to relinquish pride in return for employment. I remember when I was going through a rough patch in my life, I couldn't find a job, and I realized that there's so many jobs available. I could just go and become a cleaner. And I realized there was a lot of pride about me not doing a job like that. And I looked at that pride and I thought, this is costing me my financial security right now, and I'm willing to let that go. So I did, and I went and cleaned toilets and bathrooms and offices, and that got me out of the situation I was in. And what this is showing is we always have a choice. It's just our emotions, our negative emotions, that limits us and keep us small, but we're free to surrender them at any time. Another example is the belief system having to do with epidemic diseases. A few years ago, 14 acquaintances were observed closely during an epidemic of flu. Of the 14 people, 8 came down with the flu, but 6 did not. What's important here is not that 8 people got the flu, but that 6 did not. In any epidemic, there are people who do not catch it. Even during the depths of the Depression, there were still people who became wealthy and even millionaires. The very thought of poverty was catching in those days, but somehow people didn't buy into it, therefore it didn't apply to them. For negativity to apply in our life, we must first subscribe to it, and secondly, give it the energy of belief. If we have the power to make negativity manifest in our life, obviously our mind also has the power to make its converse come true. So this is the next factor involved in apathy and depression. Choosing the positive is how you can lift yourself out of this experience. One surprising effect of the willingness to let go of our inner negativity is the discovery that the polar opposite exists. There is an inner reality that we can term our inner greatness or higher self. It has much more power than the inner negativity. In return for letting go of the payoffs that we were getting from the negative position, we are now surprised by the positive payoffs that stem from the power of our positive feelings. For example, when we let go of blame, we experience forgiveness. Our higher self, which we might say is the composite of our higher feelings, has almost unlimited capabilities. It can create employment opportunities. It can create situations for the healing of relationships. It has the power to create the opportunity for loving relationships, financial opportunities, and physical healing. As we stop giving authority and energy to all of the negative programs that stem from our own thinking, we stop giving away our power to others and we begin to own it back again. The result is a rise of self-esteem, the return of creativity, and the opening of a positive vision of the future that replaces fearfulness. We can experiment with someone with whom we have a poor relationship with due to our holding of resentments. Just think of one person right now that you have a poor relationship with or that you don't like. So we can sit down and say to ourselves that this will merely be an experiment. The purpose for this, we tell ourselves, is strictly to learn. That is, we want to become familiar with the laws of consciousness and to watch the phenomena that occur. We acknowledge the payoffs we've been getting from our negative feelings. We surrender each component, and at the same time, we let go of resisting that within us which would be willing to heal the relationship. At this point, it's not necessary to have any personal contact with the other person. We're doing this experiment for our own sake and not for them. As we look within ourselves, we ask, what is this anger covering up? Underneath the anger, we're likely to find fear. Aside from fear, we also find jealousy. We find competitiveness and all the other little components of the feeling complex that have blocked the relationship. The simultaneous letting go of the negative and letting go of resisting the positive result in a shift of inner energies, and there is the accompanying subtle change in our self-esteem. Just a simple thing like this. Letting go of our resistance to the willingness to have something positive in the relationship is all that's necessary. We can just sit back and watch what occurs. In this experiment, we're not interested in whether the other person gets it. We're only interested that we get it. We're only interested in moving our own position in the matter, and then we just watch what happens. A very rewarding experience usually ensues, which will take different forms depending on the circumstances. Another cause for apathy is the residual of a previously experienced traumatic overwhelm which hasn't been resolved. So we've looked at a few different causes now we're looking at past experiences that we haven't healed yet. The mind projects onto the future with the expectation that the past will be repeated. When we discover this unconscious dynamic, we can choose to look again at the emotional complex. So what are all these feelings inside of me around whatever this future projection is, and disassemble it into its component parts, let go of all the negative aspects of that, and let go of our resistance to the positive ones. As we do this, our perspective of the future changes. We can forgive ourselves that at the time of the previous emotional overwhelm, we simply didn't know how to handle it. There were a lot of residuals that left us emotionally disabled at the time. We can choose, but because in our unconscious mind, there's no such thing as time, the unconscious mind is just always present in the now, we can choose at any time in the present to heal the past event. As we go through our own emotional healing for our own sake, the past event now begins to take on a different meaning. Our higher self begins to create a new context for it. We can see the hidden gift in that past experience, and we can end up acknowledging that it gave us a new opportunity to learn, grow, and to acquire wisdom. One of the most common areas in which we see this emotional crippling is after divorce or relationship breakup. All too often it's followed by bitterness and the impaired capacity to create a new loving relationship. This unwillingness to let go of blame continues the emotional crippling, which can go on for years or even a lifetime. When we come upon bitterness, what we really discover is an unhealed area in our own emotional makeup. And the effort that we put into healing it will bring enormous rewards. In any situation which involves suffering, we have to ask ourselves, how long am I willing to pay this cost? What were the karmic propensities to begin with? How much blame is enough? Is there a time to call an end to it? How much sacrifice am I willing to pay to the other person for their wrongs, which are real or imaginary, probably imaginary? How much guilt is enough? How much self-punishment is enough? When will I give up my secret pleasure of self-punishment? When does the sentence come to an end? When we really examine it, we'll always find that we have been punishing ourselves for ignorance, naivety, innocence, and a lack of inner education. So much of depression and apathy comes back to punishing ourselves for things that we couldn't have possibly been prepared for anyway. We can ask ourselves, when was I ever trained in the techniques of emotional self-healing? When I went to school, did they teach me courses on consciousness? Did anyone ever tell me that I had the freedom to choose what went into my mind? Was I ever taught that I could refuse all of the negative programming? Did anyone ever tell me the laws of consciousness? If not, why beat ourselves up about having innocently believed certain things? Why not stop beating ourselves up right now? We did all that we thought was best in the moment. It seemed like a good idea at the time, is what we can say about our past actions and those of others. We've all been unwittingly programmed without our conscious assent. Out of our confusion, ignorance, and naivety, we bought into the negative programs. This is like what the Buddha said about the source of all evil being ignorance. That's all evil is, it's ignorance, unconsciousness. And it's the same for us. We can't keep blaming ourselves when we did what we thought was best at the time with what we understood about the world and ourselves. Out of our confusion, ignorance, and naivety, we bought into negative programs. We let them run us, but now we can choose to stop. We can choose a different direction. We can choose to become more aware, more conscious, more responsible, and more discerning. We can refuse to sit there like a blank tape recorder, taking in every program the world hands us. The world is only too willing to exploit our naivety and play upon our smallness with all its vanities and fears. When we become aware of how we were manipulated, exploited, and taken in, anger is going to come up. Be ready to handle it. It's okay to be angry. It's better to be angry than apathetic by a long shot. In anger, we have a lot of energy. We can do something about it. We can take action. We can change our mind. We can reverse direction. Then it's easy to jump up from anger to courage. On the level of courage, we can see the feeling, examine it, and observe how all of this is happening within us. We get a really objective point of view when we're at the level of courage, instead of getting sucked into all of our emotions and feelings. We begin to see that our smallness was a bill of goods that we bought. In that investigation, we'll stumble upon our own inner innocence. When we rediscover it, we can let go of a lot of guilt. We really start to see how innocent we truly are. When the guilt goes, necessity for self-punishment goes with it, and that lifts us right out of apathy and depression. We can choose to revalidate ourselves, our value, and our worth. And we can see how others were programmed just like we were. They too were doing the best they could with what they knew at the time. We don't have to blame them or ourselves anymore. We can do away with blame altogether. We can give up the whole game of blame as obsolete and ineffective. So this is the final component in getting out of apathy and depression: the company we keep. Another valuable technique for getting out of apathy, depression, and situations which are predominantly being run by the thought, I can't, is to choose to be with other people who have resolved the same problem with which we struggle. This is one of the great powers of self-help groups. When we're in a negative state, we've given a lot of energy to negative thought forms, and the positive thought forms are weak. Those who are in a higher vibration are free of the energy from their negative thoughts and have energized positive thought forms. Merely being in their presence is beneficial. In some self-help groups, this is called hanging out with the winners. The benefit here is on the psychic level of consciousness, and there's a transfer of positive energy and a relighting of one's own latent positive thought forms. In some self-help groups, this is called getting it by osmosis. It's not necessary to know how it happens, but merely that it does happen. It's common to witness this phenomenon. For instance, in our society, most people have been trained to be logical and left-brained in their orientation. However, some people from birth are right-brain orientated. Such right-brain persons are characterized by greater powers of intuition, creativity, telepathic communication, and awareness of thought forms and energy vibrations. Frequently included amongst these capabilities is the capacity to see the bioenergy field around the human body called the aura. When in the presence of people with this capacity, it becomes possible to share this capacity. This was true even as a skeptical, logical, left-brained male scientist who was in the company of people with a capacity to see auras. So this is David Hawkins again. Upon following their instructions on how to see the aura, surprisingly, there was indeed a visible field of light around people's heads. In particular, the aura around one man seemed to be almost like an ectoplasm, hung predominantly over his left ear. On the right side of the head, however, there was practically nothing to be seen. To know whether this phenomenon was real or not coming from the imagination, it was confirmed by asking someone nearby who was adept at seeing auras. She also saw an aura that was very wide on one side and practically absent on the other. The capacity to see auras was available only when in the presence of others with that capacity. Upon leaving the instructional situation where there had been people who could see auras, the capacity was no longer there. In the following years, when in the company of friends who could see auras, the capacity returned. One time in the presence of a woman psychologist at the clinic, whose job was that of psychic diagnosis by means of observing people's auras and their changing color patterns, there suddenly was the capacity not only to see auras, but also to see them in their scintillating colors and watch them change in response to fluctuating emotions. Just by talking with her, that capacity was suddenly available. It is as though when we're in the proximity of the auras of people with certain capacities, some transfer of ability can take place. Simply put, we're either positively or negatively influenced by the company we keep. It's unlikely that we will overcome an inhibition if we choose to be in the company of others who have the same problem. This phenomenon was evident in the case of a divorced woman who came for her consultation. So David Hawkins was a psychotherapist and he'd see clients face to face. She wanted to know whether or not she should have psychotherapy. Her complaints were a recurrent ulcer and migraine headaches. As the story unfolded, greater bitterness over an unfortunately traumatic divorce came forth. She joined a consciousness-raising feminist group, she said. She described this particular group as almost completely made up of divorced women who were bitter, angry, and hateful of men. As a group, they were getting a lot of payoff from their negativity. I'm sure you've experienced the good feelings or the emotional payoff of having a really good gossip session. It brings up all these feelings of passion and anger and superiority, and we get huge payoff out of it. We've got to be honest with ourselves. So as a group, they were getting a lot of payoff from their negativity. In reality, their lives were forlorn and rather pathetic as they struggled to regain their self-esteem through extremes and marked emotional imbalance. After listening to her story and investigating her life circumstances, it was suggested that instead of psychotherapy, she follow one simple recommendation for a period of 3 months. If it didn't work, then she could reassess the need for psychotherapy. The recommendation was merely to discontinue her association with the group and her bitter divorced friends, and instead seek the company of people who have successfully re-established relationships despite former divorces. At first, she resisted and claimed that she had nothing in common with these group members. Then she acknowledged 2 basic facts. First, it was far more energy saving to foster relationships with positive people. Secondly, one of the laws of consciousness is that like goes to like. Bitterness attracts bitterness, whereas love attracts love. She asked herself, where has my bitterness taken me? Have I gotten anything out of it that's positive and helpful? As time progressed, she stopped spending time with her group and began to pursue relationships with healthier, more balanced people. In the company of happier people, she had an exhilarated awareness of how much negativity she was holding inside of herself. She began to be aware that she was consciously holding that negativity and choosing to hold it, and she began to look at the cost of this negativity. Her whole social life changed. She became smiling and happier. Her migraine headaches disappeared. Eventually, she fell in love again and joked that falling in love was the best cure she'd ever discovered for an ulcer. To summarize, If we find ourselves in the state of apathy and depression, we can discover the underlying program by asking ourselves, what are we trying to prove? Are we trying to prove that life sucks? That this is a hopeless world? That it wasn't our fault? That we can't find love? That happiness is impossible? What are we trying to justify? How much are we willing to pay to be right? As we acknowledge and let go of the feelings that arise in response to these questions, the answers begin to appear. So that's the apathy and depression summary. A few different causes. I can't versus I just won't in reality. Blaming ourselves or others, blame at all. Past conflicts that need resolution and healing and re-examining. And also the kind of company that we keep. So the first exercise that we're going to do for this series is actually, I want you to look at any areas in your life where you experience hopelessness, apathy, depression, feelings of I can't, and get really detailed. Pull out a piece of paper or a diary or open up a new note on your computer and look at a specific area where you feel apathetic. Relationships, money, business, career, health, and dot point all of the reasons that you feel apathetic in that area. Look at where you're telling yourself I can't and ask yourself, is it true that I can't, or is it just that I won't? I won't because it'll be too hard, or this, that, and the other. Just write out all those reasons. Unpack all of these things. The key to freedom here is awareness. Through this whole series we're doing, it's all about awareness. And the more aware you become of your own inner workings, the more free you can become. Also, look at where you're blaming. Who am I blaming for this? Am I blaming myself for not being good enough? Am I blaming others? And start to look at, well, did I actually know any better? Has anyone showed me how to succeed in this area? If not, then it's time to forgive yourself. It's time to forgive other people. It's time to let go of blame altogether because it just isn't effective. It doesn't help you get what you want. We also need to look at past conflicts, past traumas that we haven't resolved. A lot of the time, depression and apathy is because we had a horrible experience in the past. Like I remember for a long time, I didn't want to get into a relationship because of a painful rejection that I'd experienced at an earlier time. And instead of holding on to that and letting that keep me bound in depression and apathy, it got to the point where I was like, all right, that didn't work. And that's just an experience that I had. And it was actually a very valuable experience because I started to discover things about myself that I probably may not have known otherwise. And we reframe that and it changes the whole meaning. So look, in this area where I'm feeling apathetic, put this on your list as well. What past experiences have I had that are coloring this right now? And then go back and look at those past experiences. And you can use different methods like timeline therapy, or I'll probably put out a guided meditation at some point that can really help that process. But it can just be as simple as, okay, that past experience, what were the feelings that I was feeling at the time, and just start using the letting go technique on it. And the company we keep. Lastly, if you're spending time with people who are struggling in a similar way in this particular area you're looking at of your life, it's helpful to look at particular areas rather than just feel depressed in general, because the breakthrough is often in these specifics, and these specific things that we've believed or hold on to. And as we let go of it in this one area, it'll spread through your whole life. Any other areas that you're depressed in, it'll start to affect them. So the company we keep, change up the crowd you're in, whatever it takes. If you have to cut off friends, even there could be people in your own family that you just constantly getting this negativity from, or this similar kind of helpless, hopeless feeling from. It's just time to give that a break. It's time to surround yourself with people who are going to lift you up to a new level. So I hope you got a ton of value from that. Please leave any questions or comments hit the like button and hit subscribe and share this with anyone who could get some value from this, which is pretty much everyone, I believe. So I look forward to seeing you on the next video.